Thank you, Chairman Conrad, and welcome,
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary. I wanted to ask three questions. The first is about Tiger
Yes.
grants and that program. And before I ask you the question, let me thank you. Rhode Island could not be more delighted to have obtained $22 million for the Quonset project, which will help provide vital infrastructure for support for a growing clean energy industry and the potential for that to be a real hub for offshore energy. So,
Well, thank you for your support, Senator. You and I met and we talked about some issues, and we appreciate your support.
well, it's very mutual. My question is this: you were able to fund $1.5 billion in Tiger grants.
Yes.
When you put them out to bid, you got $60 billion worth of applications.
Yes.
That leaves, assuming all the $1.5 billion goes out, about $58.5 billion of projects that states and municipalities and others brought forward and that we have not been able to fund. Very broad strokes, how would you evaluate those $58.5 billion? How many of them, if the funding were available, are really worthy of going forward with now, as opposed to just, sort of a fluff project thrown in on a Hail Mary? I mean, how many of them, and what sort of a number should we be considering to take advantage of all that ready-to-go, shovel-ready work?
I would say the
fund a
majority of
second
those,
round?
unfortunately for us, these were very hard decisions. And I would say the majority of the $60 billion were very worthwhile projects that if we have had $60 billion, the majority of those would have been funded. They were good projects, they really were. And I know there's a lot of disappointment around this building and the building across the way, and I've met with some about that, and we'll try to be helpful. We do have $600 million in our 2010 budget for Tiger. We'll be putting up guidance, and we know that some of these projects will come back to us, and we encourage that. And $600 million is real money, I think, but it's not nearly, enough to meet all of the needs.
Yeah. I have a more general point that I'd like to ask your opinion on. We face twin problems: a dire need for jobs, particularly in my home state of Rhode Island, but across the country, and a fiscal problem that is looming towards us. Those are in opposition. The spending and borrowing now to support the jobs adds to the fiscal problem later. It strikes me that there is something of a sweet spot in the middle of that, where we are dealing with infrastructure that is sooner or later going to have to be repaired anyway. We have a Providence viaduct that is so decrepit that they've stopped committing, I think both of our state and federal have stopped committing maintenance funds to it because it really needs a rebuild. We have a bridge that is requiring people to drive all the way around an outer highway loop to avoid going over the Pawtucket River because of weight restrictions that prevents large trucks from going over. It's Highway 95, it's pretty central. Those things are going to be repaired sooner or later. And under the old Yankee principle that a stitch in time saves nine, we all know that very often maintenance projects are cheaper done early rather than when they're left to further erode and degrade. Is that a philosophy that we should be following? That where we can identify transportation projects that are clearly going to need to be accomplished at some point, why not speed them up now? And is there not a good argument for those projects that really doesn't contribute to the long-term fiscal liabilities of the nation?
Absolutely, and there are many of those around the country, and we know for the last decade we've ignored our infrastructure needs. We haven't put the resources into them, and that's why we have bridges falling down around the country. We have roads crumbling around the country. What you all did was very helpful in giving $48 billion to infrastructure. That money has been well spent, and a lot of people have gone to work in good-paying jobs around the country. But we still have many unmet needs.
So to you've given me a great lead into my third question, which was about how we look at better capital budgeting, if you will, of our infrastructure needs. I really applaud what the President has done with the infrastructure fund. I think Chairman Dodd did a lot of work on that earlier. I think it's a great idea, very important, and it's a step in the direction. It's a mechanism for a form of capital budgeting. But our budget doesn't really reflect in any way that I can find the infrastructure deficit that we have as a country, of failed and failing roads, water, bridges, basic infrastructure. And moreover, when we go to build a piece of infrastructure that's going to last 20, 40, 60 years, we expense it in the year that we spend it. The private sector would never do that. If you were a corporation and you didn't disclose those kinds of capital liabilities, you would have lawsuits all over you. And if you had a major project that you were going to recover, you were going to amortize over 20, 40 years, you wouldn't be forced to expense it in the same year. Are there ways that you, within your existing authorizations, can explore ways of trying to better budget in a way that matches private sector budgeting, so that you're accounting for real infrastructure liabilities and able to expense over the life of a project?
Well, what we did in anticipation of you all passing another jobs bill is we have a list, which I'll be happy to provide to the committee, of the infrastructure needs around the country, the most immediate and more long-term. It's a long list, and it's billions of dollars. That is what sort of our guidepost would be as we work with Congress on a new authorization bill. Here are the unmet needs, and here are the sort of the wish list for states and others in transportation. And
my time has expired, so if I could ask you to take that last question for the record, if you'd
Okay.
like to answer in greater detail, I'd appreciate it, and I thank the chairman.